Well, there is precedent for this, obviously. Many countries have left the UK, many peacefully, I should say. And in every case, the UK government initially said no. Well, Canada, the Bahamas.
Which countries have left the UK? But the UK, that's
and the British Empire.
So, Ash, thanks very much for joining us. I mean, your big pitch in this campaign is that you want to maintain each election being a de facto referendum.
No, it's not a de facto referendum.
Okay, just explain to our listeners how it would work.
Okay, so a de facto referendum is on a single issue for a single occasion, and that is not what I'm suggesting. So I just want to be very clear on that. And that has been a strategy that has been suggested, I think, most recently by Nicola Sturgeon. It hasn't been approved by the SNP membership. What I'm suggesting is different. I'm suggesting that based on the fact that we are at an impasse right now, where the SNP policy until now has been to win elections, use those elections as a moral mandate, if you like, to go and ask, request, beg, however you see that, a referendum from the UK government, unsuccessfully, as it turns out, over the last few years. So my assessment of that is, I think, quite clear now. Everyone can see, and Nicola Sturgeon has made very sure of that by going to the Supreme Court. We know that a democratic election in Scotland would be recognised by the UK government, and we know that for that reason, they are not giving Scotland a referendum. So they know the power of the ballot box, and that is why they are seeking to refuse a referendum to Scotland, because they don't want to find out what the will of the Scottish people is on the referendum or the independence question. So what I'm suggesting is that that is not tenable. The UK is a voluntary arrangement. We're always being told that it's voluntary, and therefore there must be a way for Scotland to express its will. If it wants to be independent, it should be able to express that. You'll know that in Northern Ireland, in the event of a sustained support for that, there is an opportunity for them to have a border poll every few years. And so what I'm suggesting is that Scotland can't be held hostage in this way, and we can quite simply use the ballot box, use the elections that we do have access to, so that would be general elections, Scottish elections, in order to give that opportunity to the people of Scotland to express their choice.
Okay, so you're basically saying, so does that mean at the next general election, the SNP manifesto is basically saying the first thing, I mean, I presume you would have some other things on health and education and drugs deaths and ferry contracts, etc., but you'd basically be saying this election is a referendum, and if you get 50, let's say you get 51%, you're like, right, we're going to be independent now. But how do you actually get the UK government to, let's say you get 51%, how are you actually going to get the UK government to say, fine, we will let you go?
Well, it wouldn't be a referendum. So we've that option's been closed down. So it's not a referendum. And in fact, most countries that have become independent, they don't use referendums. They just use the ballot box. So the referendum is not the gold standard here. The ballot box is the gold standard. So yes, my intention would be to run each and every election with this question front and center, first line of the manifesto, so that everyone is very clear what they're voting for. And they won't be voting for a mandate for a referendum or to discuss it at some point in the future. The people of Scotland will be asked very specifically if they want to begin negotiations with Westminster to exit the UK. So everyone will be clear. People of Scotland will be clear what they're being asked to vote on. The UK government will be very clear about what Scotland is voting for, and so will the international community. We have to remember, we live in a democratic society, probably one of the oldest democracies. The ballot box is an accepted route, and it is always recognised. All the Scottish elections that we've had over the last few years, the result of those elections has been recognised in Scotland, in the UK, and internationally. And I believe,
let's say, okay, and listen, many of my listeners will really agree with you. I have many of my listeners who message in all the time saying this is meant to be a voluntary agreement. If so, why can't we leave? So I think a lot of people will support you on that. But a lot of people will also be saying,
actually, there was a poll on this. I don't know if you saw just a couple of days ago. 93% of SNP voters agreed with this approach, and actually a majority of the public agreed too. 52% of the public agreed that a democratically expressed vote by the Scottish people should be taken seriously by the UK.
That sounds very reasonable to a lot of people. But the stumbling block is going to be whether it is a Labour Prime Minister Keir Starmer, whether it's Rishi Sunak who manages to win the next election. If they say no to you, what are you going to do?
But do you see what I'm saying? The reason that they're saying no to a referendum is because they accept the power of the ballot box option. Do you understand what I'm getting at there? The only reason
I don't know if you
using a referendum is because they don't want Scotland to express its choices democratically. I think that makes my point. They understand, everybody understands, the ballot box, in a democratic culture, that is, the way people express their support, and everyone understands that that would be accepted.
So again, we understand the power of the ballot box, but the question is, if you are up against somebody who doesn't have the same view as you on that, what are you going to do? That is the question that many of my listeners who will be supportive of you, by the way.
Yeah. Well, there is precedent for this, obviously. Many countries have left the UK, many peacefully, I should say. And in every case, the UK government initially said no. Well, Canada, the Bahamas.
Which countries have left the UK? But the UK,
and the British Empire. And the British Empire. So the UK started off the British Empire started off by saying no, and then eventually said yes with rising international pressure. And I believe it would be the same here. But in yesterday, I set out what I'm calling my 4 pillars, if you like, as a way of moving this debate forward and adding some substance to this. So, of course, we have the Smith Commission. So that's the only really written document that we have from the UK government on this issue. And of course, it says that, nothing in the Smith Commission report prevents Scotland becoming an independent country in the future, should the people so choose. We also have the issue of the international community. So you'll know that when colleagues have been giving speeches formally in the European Parliament, how much support was expressed for Scotland. Ministers, SNP ministers, have spent years now speaking to other countries, and there is a lot of support out there for Scotland and its path to self-determination.
But
the other option, of course, is that
it's also well documented that other countries are not going to get involved with this unless there's a settlement between the UK government and the Scottish government. But look, I get your argument. You've made that, because I just want to move on, because there's a few other points I wanted to raise with you as well. I mean, some of your colleagues have expressed some concern about this strategy of using a general election as the moment to do this. I spoke with John Nicholson a few weeks ago. Stuart MacDonald has expressed some views. Ben McPherson this morning has written an article just saying, look, I don't know, we're ready for this conversation. I mean, how do you think you persuade people, particularly when there's so many other things going on, the cost of living crisis, the NHS in crisis, we've had this big bust up over the gender reform bill in Scotland. Many people who support independence are saying, look, it doesn't feel like this is the right time to make this a priority.
Well, I would totally take issue with that. I think there couldn't be a better time and a more important time for Scotland to become independent. The UK government has trashed the economy. People in Scotland are living with power bills that are almost enough to make them lose their homes. Everything's more expensive because Liz Truss's economic carnage that she caused, putting inflation up through the roof, people's mortgages increasing, and so on. Brexit, which is obviously having a disproportionately hideous effect on the Scottish economy that Scotland didn't vote for, by the way. So, there's never been a better time for Scotland to make a choice to get out of this madness that is the UK government right now. Scotland wants to make different choices. Scotland makes different choices at the ballot box on things. I mean, Brexit is a classic example of that. And I think that should we be able to get control of our own affairs, that Scotland would become a much more successful and fairer country.
Okay.
I saw Ben McPherson's comments, and I have to say it's quite dispiriting, actually, that there's this passive acceptance, of the status quo. And, I think it really just shows that his support for Humza Yousaf seems to be quite happy to put up with the status quo. I'm not happy to put up with the status quo. I think Scotland cannot be held hostage by the UK government, and that everyone recognises democracy. And I will say as well that this is the point of fresh leadership. We're in a position where some people in the party are wondering, what direction do we go in? How do we get there? How do we restore that confidence? But surely that's the point of a leader. You set out an alternative vision, you unite everyone around you, and you go forward towards your goal,
Okay.
which in my opinion, for the Scottish National Party, is independence for Scotland.
So the voting starts tomorrow, and there are some quarters who've expressed some concerns over the independent scrutiny of the voting process. Do you feel comfortable with how the process is going to unfold?
I think it's very important that the membership of the SNP and the wider country actually have full confidence in the transparency and the fairness of this process as it's being carried out. I'm on record as saying that I think the time frame for this was far too short for something as significant as this. You know, it's not just the leader of a small party in Scotland. We're the largest party in Scotland. The person that wins this contest will go on to become the First Minister. So clearly everyone needs to have confidence in the process. I have asked for an independent third party company to be running the voting. And I've also asked for an independent observer to also be watching, observing the proceedings, just to give confidence to everyone that this process is being run appropriately. And I also do think that Peter Murrell, effectively being in charge of the contest, I think many people would consider that to be a conflict of interest.
Interesting. Now, just two questions before I let you go. Now, you're hovering around 10% of the vote at the moment, but it does look likely that you're not going to win, but you could be incredibly important in this. You could be the king or the queen maker in this. And where would you want your second preferences to go? Because you could play a very deciding role in this overall contest.
Well, I'm in this contest to win this contest, and I would take issue with that polling. I think it is quite difficult to predict at this stage how this contest will play out. There's a large number of undecided voters. And in fact, I think I've seen some analysis this morning that suggests my support is perhaps more close to the 20% mark. So I think there is everything to play for. I do accept that in terms of name recognition, you know, perhaps a few weeks ago, I was much less well known than the other candidates. However, I am the independence candidate, which I'm sure will garner a lot of support inside the party membership, because it's a very important issue for them. And actually, over the last week or so, a lot of people have reached out to express their support for me. And afraid you're not going coming up.
Let's say you're not going to.
Is that, you know, they're seeing me as the only hope for the SNP right now. We are at a crossroads now. And I believe the membership are going to take this very, very seriously indeed.
But having said that, you've got no one big in Hollywood supporting. You've only got one MP, Joanna Cherry. But
well, it's one member, one vote. So actually,
your second,
you know, the membership have the same vote as the parliamentarians.
But if
and you know, the membership will make up their own mind.
To support, if you had to, you know, eventually drop out and then pick one of the other,
dropping out.
Pick one of the other candidates. Who do you feel more aligned to? Kate Forbes or
to be honest, I would see both of those other candidates as continuity candidates. I'm not the continuity candidate. I'm against the status quo. So I don't feel that I'm that aligned actually with either of those two candidates on a whole range of issues. And it is a single transferable vote. The membership will make up their mind as to how to rank the candidates themselves, but they don't have to. They can just pick one candidate. So I'm sure the membership will be carefully weighing this up over the next few days.
And look, you've talked about the importance of the ballot box. You've made a very ardent, passionate argument about that. What happens if the SNP goes backwards at the ballot box at the next set of general elections and Scottish elections? Because at the moment, the polls look like the SNP are going backwards. What does that say for your cause for independence?
Well, I think with fresh leadership, a fresh team, a renewed focus on the priorities of the Scottish people, I think support will continue to stay very strong for the SNP. There was a poll yesterday, I think it was yesterday or the day before, putting support for independence around 52%. So I think there still is everything to play for. And if I'm the leader, I think my strategy of running each election as an opportunity for the Scottish people to express their will and independence can only improve turnout and support for the SNP.